How much time does it take to lose 3 million men? In the summer of 1941, soldiers thought they would return home by autumn. 3 million Wehrmacht troops crossed the Soviet border. They expected a quick win, but for 91,000 of them, this march dragged on for 15 years. Operation Barbarossa moved east. 3 million soldiers is a massive number. That advancing force held more people than the entire population of Lithuania at the time. The men stepped over the borderline. Long columns of infantry marched down unpaved dirt roads. Heavy dust rose from their boots, coating their uniforms and faces. The soldiers looked confident. They walked past captured towns, sure the war was already won. For weeks, nothing slowed them down. They covered dozens of kilometers every single day. The men pushed deeper into unfamiliar territory, but the physical distances just kept growing. By autumn, heavy rain turned the dry dirt into deep mud. The confident marching columns finally stopped. 2,700 kilometers, dirt roads all the way. By late 1941, summer uniforms provided zero warmth. The temperature dropped. Men marched east. The distance broke them before the enemy did. Berlin was far behind. The cold hit hard. It was the worst winter in decades. Soldiers slept in the open. Supply lines snapped. Fuel ran low. Food stopped coming. Boots fell apart. A standard division required 50 tons of daily supplies. They received a fraction. Berlin to the Volga spans 2,700 kilometers. Men marched this entire route on foot. They moved through endless frozen plains. Every step took its toll. Joints ached. Limbs went numb. The weather killed horses. It broke machines. It wore the men down. Hitler looked south. He needed oil. The Caucasus fields became the new target. He redirected the troops. Army Group South turned. Men marched toward the Volga River. They dragged their frozen boots across the ice. Fatigue settled in. Disease spread fast. The men were starving. They were exhausted. They were dying from the sheer geography. They barely reached the riverbanks. Orders came from the command to capture the Caucasus oil and secure the city simultaneously. Berlin split Army Group South into two separate operational directions. Prisoners pulled dry grass by hand right from under the rusted barbed wire. Weakened fingers dug deep into the hard summer soil to drag out the dirty roots. Men chewed the raw stems in silence while German guards watched them from the towers. Wehrmacht soldiers had already cut their own daily supply rations during the long eastward march. They chose to leave the captured Soviet troops with zero food or drinking water. The Army Command intentionally ignored the 1929 Geneva Convention rules regarding prisoner treatment. For an entire arm's length around the camp fences, the earth remained bare without a single surviving blade of green. Farther back along the stretched supply lines, partisans hid deep inside the thick local forests. These scattered guerrilla groups constantly disrupted the isolated transport convoys moving toward the Eastern Front. German commanders realized they could not protect the massive remote regions stretching behind the main advancing army. The rural population frequently sheltered these resistance fighters among their small wooden village houses. Retaliation from the advancing occupying forces struck the suspected settlements quickly. The heavy smell of burning pine wood and ash drifted across the dusty dirt roads. They burned churches with people inside. A Red Army private walked through his village. He found nothing but ash, smoldering timber, dead neighbors. The sight changed everything. Grief turned into a simple need to kill. Anger built fast. No rules applied anymore. Payback became the only mission. Every Soviet rifleman wanted revenge. It was deeply personal now. The front line became a slaughterhouse. Down south, the German advance split. The High Command divided their forces. Army Group A turned toward the Caucasus. They needed the Baku oil fields. Tanks needed that fuel. That move left Army Group B exposed. Their lines stretched thin across the open steppe. They headed straight for the Volga River. Stalingrad was not the initial target. But Berlin changed the plan. Hitler issued a strict directive: hold the positions, pay any price. Retreat was not an option. It was late August 1942. The summer heat baked the dry Russian plains. Dust choked engines. Men dropped from exhaustion. The troops kept walking east. The human cost mounted daily with every single mile they advanced toward the river. German armor columns rolled through the dirt. They reached the banks of the Don River. Commanders ordered local residents to stay inside the combat zone, forcing them to dig trenches for the military instead of escaping. 400,000 civilians remained trapped inside the smoking ruins. That mass of people equals the entire population of modern Tallinn, locked inside a perimeter without an exit. By the final days of August 1942, Luftwaffe aircraft began wiping the urban blocks off the map. German twin-engine bombers opened their bay doors over the residential districts. High explosive payloads dropped toward the streets, while wooden evacuation ferries took direct hits and sank straight to the bottom of the Volga River. Down below, local residents kept digging anti-tank ditches in the dry summer dirt. The pressure waves from over 1,000 tons of falling bombs shattered remaining glass for miles around. The noise was so heavy it ruptured eardrums, leaving men and women with blood trickling down their necks. Joseph Stalin issued Order 227, a rigid directive promising a firing squad for any soldier stepping back. Blocking detachments set up positions behind friendly lines, with orders to shoot anyone retreating from the urban ruins. General Vasily Chukov took command of the crumbling defense line and demanded his men survive by closing the physical distance. He ordered the troops to hug the enemy positions, staying so close that German pilots risked hitting their own advancing infantry. It was a desperate tactical move, forged in the dust of crushed concrete. In just 7 days, 40,000 people died. 5 men dropped into the sewer, submachine guns ready. The distance between armies vanished. German heavy artillery became useless. Shells would hit their own advancing troops. Soldiers fought for every single room. A German squad held the second floor. A Soviet squad held the basement. Both shared the same ruined house. Soviet troops used the underground tunnels. Groups of 5 to 10 men moved unseen. They struck fast. Combat meant pistols and grenades. Submachine guns fired 900 rounds per minute. Ammunition ran out. The metallic clank of infantry shovels echoed in dark basements. Knives found flesh. Bayonets pierced ribs. Snipers picked off anything moving above ground. Mines shredded legs in the streets. Trapped civilians caught the crossfire. No one retreated. No one escaped the claustrophobia. The melee combat never stopped. They called it Rat War. Today, tourists walk along the paved embankments of the Volga River. Back then, the Red Army clung to a narrow strip of that shoreline. Wehrmacht infantrymen almost reached the water, but they ran out of ammunition and physical strength. The Soviets still controlled about 1/10 of the city. The temperature dropped below 0 degrees Celsius, while German soldiers were still wearing their summer uniforms. Out in the open steppe, the tactical situation looked different from the ruined streets. The long northern and southern flanks were guarded by Allied Romanian armies. These units were stretched thin across vast distances, lacking heavy anti-tank weapons. The exposed front line extended for over 500 kilometers across the flat terrain. The Soviet command secretly brought in over 800 tanks and amassed 1.1 million men near the city. 27,000 men surrendered on the first day. It was the morning of November 19th. The steppe horizon turned black with Soviet armor. The frozen ground vibrated. 800 tanks rolled forward. They hit the Romanian flanks. 34 tanks crushed the trenches. The guns failed. Shells bounced off sloped armor. Soldiers dropped their rifles. They ran backward. Radiomen hammered urgent messages to Berlin. The lines collapsed entirely. The advance accelerated. Nobody stopped the armor. 2 Soviet spearheads pushed deep into the steppe. They bypassed the main resistance. Within 4 days, they met. They linked up 60 kilometers west of the city. The encirclement was complete. The trap snapped shut. 27,000 soldiers became prisoners in a single day. Inside the pocket sat 300,000 Axis troops. That equals the entire active army of modern France. They were trapped. Supply lines vanished. Connections to Army Group B severed. They were cut off. No fuel, no food, no way out. General Friedrich Paulus watched the disaster. He sat inside the ruined city. He requested an immediate breakout. The window was closing fast. The tanks still had fuel. The ring was not airtight yet. Movement meant a chance at survival. He sent a message to High Command. But Berlin sent a different response. The reply sealed their fate. Winter temperatures continued to drop. The Soviet noose tightened daily. Hitler explicitly forbade any retreat and ordered the trapped army to hold the ruined city at all costs. How do you feed 300,000 men from the air? The transport planes managed to drop only a tenth of the required volume. Hitler promised that his air force would keep the trapped soldiers alive through the winter months. Down in the freezing trenches, the daily reality looked much different from the maps in Berlin. Starving men broke their teeth on hard crumbs of frozen bread. They stripped the dead draft animals and boiled chunks of tough horse meat in dirty water just to survive. The temperature dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, freezing the soil solid across the steppes. You could not dig proper graves in the thick ice, so the unburied corpses piled up in the open outside the bunkers. The physical collapse of the soldiers accelerated with every passing week. Dysentery and typhus swept through the crowded and ruined basements, killing men faster than the Soviet infantry. The soldiers shifted their focus entirely to surviving another freezing night. The Luftwaffe lost nearly 500 transport planes trying to sustain this failing airlift. The supply situation on the ground reached the breaking point. Ammunition reserves ran dry, leaving the defenders with almost nothing to stop the approaching tanks. An entire artillery crew would receive exactly one explosive shell to last the whole day. On average, the planes brought in 85 tons of cargo instead of the necessary 700. For most men of the 6th Army, the war did not end in the spring of 1945. Out of 300,000 troops, 91,000 lived long enough to hear the surrender order. 91,000 marched into the freezing camps. 5,000 returned. Exhausted soldiers crawled from the crushed basements of the ruined city. They threw down their empty rifles onto the rubble. They raised frostbitten hands. Then came the death marches. Miles of gray, stumbling figures moved across the endless snow. Guards pushed them forward. If a starving man fell behind the column, he simply stayed there. Between 30 and 40 million people perished across the entire Eastern Front. The sheer amount of death left no room for mercy toward the defeated. It took 11 full years after the global conflict ended for the last prisoners to see home. In 1956, wooden train doors finally opened at a West German station. The surviving men stepped down onto the concrete platform. They wore oversized coats. They carried empty, hollow stares. They looked right through the cheering crowds. For these few ghosts, 15 years of bitter captivity had finally come to an end.